How do they do it? Why do they do it? Riding and crashing and riding and winning and always faster and faster.
Well, welcome back everybody to With Antone MotoGP 2025. And this weekend we're heading to round 19 of the MotoGP season down to the beautiful Phillip Island in Australia. And we're heading to one of the wildest, most unpredictable races of the season. But it feels a little different this season. It's been a brutal season. And we're going to ask today, is 22 rounds too much for the riders? Should each team have a dedicated backup rider? Plus, we're going to talk about some of the changes that Liberty Media continue to make and what's happening with KTM and their crew chiefs. They seem to be on a merry-go-round with changes. So 22 rounds of racing, that puts a lot of demand on the riders. And what are we seeing this year? We're seeing some injuries. In fact, if you look at the qualifying from last year's race, the entire front row from qualification from 2024 is out injured. So that's Jorge Martin, Marc Márquez, and of course, Viñales. So I want to ask, are we putting too much on the riders? Do they really need to restructure their teams and have a dedicated backup rider? Because what we're seeing at the moment, if a team has an injury, they call on their test riders. So this weekend we've got Salvadori running for Aprilia, Pol Espargaro's jumping back on the KTM, and Michele Pero is jumping on the Ducati, I think at 38 years of age. Now what we need to ensure is there's a full grid of competitive riders each season. Now, the question is kind of begged, should we shorten the season? Now, this is never going to happen. With Dorna and Liberty, they're not going to shorten the season. If anything, they're probably going to make it longer. So we need to think about how best to support the teams. Now, does that mean more of a rethink on the calendar with maybe some bigger breaks structured in? But I also feel for those guys that have got to do all the travel. It's probably easier if you've got your private plane and when you're in Europe, but think of those guys that aren't flying in first or business class. So it's a lot to put on those riders. Now, Liberty are back in the media again, and they're making more changes. So what we're going to see is from 2027, all the teams will be considered independent. Now, we discussed this earlier about the flat structure. So at the moment, each private team receives a grant from Dorna or a payment of 5 million euros, and the factory teams receive around about 3 million euros to rent back the prototype bikes to the satellite teams, as they're called at the moment. But under this new structure, everyone's independent. We might see something more along the lines of the Concord Agreement, famously signed in Paris for Formula One. And this could be a seismic shift in the economic structure of what's going on with the MotoGP paddock and how the teams are funded. Speaking about injury, obviously Marc Márquez has had his surgery, but there's some real doubts now whether he's going to be able to return in a timely manner. The surgeons and the experts are saying it's a 4-month recovery, but I see him trying to get back for Valencia, but more important, the test for 2026. After all, if he lets Bagnaia just do the testing, it may go in a direction that Marc doesn't want to do it. What about KTM? What's happening in the pit boxes and the pit crew and the chief engineers? We're seeing Bastianini lost Garibola. He lost him to Pramac. They had a breakup early in the season. If he wasn't staying, he was told to move on. But Pramac would not, even though they've got Toprak coming next year, they wouldn't allow Phil Moron to come and join him. But it seems that Phil has now signed with KTM. Now he might be going across and supporting Brad Binder. Now the question is KTM making these decisions? What's the reason behind it? And do you think this will really help KTM get their bike to the front of the grid? So what about Phillip Island? Look, I've been lucky enough. I've visited the island, I think 5 or 6 times. I famously went down there in '89 and the very first race, and we saw Wayne Gardner at the time I think his comment was he rode his balls off to win the race. Now, anyone who's been to the island knows, and if you haven't been, I'll tell you, extreme weather, cold and wind. It can be right there on the Bass Strait between the mainland and Tasmania. The winds can howl in, and it can really be a place of vicious weather changes, which makes it extremely tough with tyres. You also got to throw in the wildlife. We've famously seen riders being hit seagulls at high speed. I think it was, he only famously had the seagull embedded in his bike. But it's also the home of the modern MotoGP TV coverage. So what Dorna saw, Australia used to lead in a lot of areas back then in TV coverage, and what they saw and the coverage they adopted. So what we see now is a real extension of that original coverage that was made famous by the Australian. Now the track itself, it's a track that demands a highly skilled rider. It levels the bikes down, so there's not so much about the bike, but it's the riders that can make the big difference. Now, famously, we talked about tyres. Last year, if you look back, Jorge Martin went out on the softer compound, and I think he fell a couple of laps. I think he got run down with 2 or 3 laps to go. And it's something that is going to be really, really important for this weekend. And I had a look at the weather. It's going to be 15, 16 degrees across the weekend, but there seems to be cloud. But look, to be honest with you, if you haven't been down to the island, then I'd make it a priority to get down there. I've been lucky enough. I think I've seen now 20, 24, 25 MotoGPs all around the world, but that circuit brings out some great racing. So if you're looking for somewhere to go, I'd certainly head down there. So let's look at this weekend. Who's going to win? Well, a fast bike, the big long main straight, Gardner Straight, famously named. It's going to be something interesting. Speaking of interesting, last year, Fernandez on the Aprilia ran no aero. So there you go, it just goes to show. Now Bezzecchi, I would be talking about Bezzecchi, but he has incurred a double long lap penalty for his crash in Mandalika with Marc Márquez. But I think it's time for Honda to shine. Don't forget Zarco's a previous winner there on the Pramac Ducati. But the rise of Honda, and particularly with what Marini's starting to do, and he's being consistent. But also, what about Pedroacosta? It's time. 38 races, and he hasn't won. He had to have the sad reflection on himself by having Aldeguer stand on the podium as a winner, as a rookie. So for him, it's going to have to be doing something a little bit more on that KTM. But I think maybe it's going to be Costa, Aldeguer, Marini on the podium this weekend, and from VR46 or Alex Marquez in the mix as well. Mr. Go Free Pecco, I have no idea, to be honest, to say what's going to go there. He goes well at the circuit. Last year he was blown away a little bit. He couldn't go with the pace, but let's wait and see. So one thing's for sure, Phillip Island always delivers on 2 things. 1, drama, and 2, close racing. And we will get some great racing this weekend. So certainly I know in Europe the time zone's not great, but it's certainly one worth watching. And with some of the main stars out this weekend because of injury, teams will be under pressure. This could not only shape how this season finishes, but could go a long way to shaping what happens in 2026. But what do you think? Are we asking too much from the riders? Is 22 rounds too much? What about this replacement rider strategy? Is pulling a late 30-year-old test rider on and putting him on a Grand Prix bike, is that good for the show? And what do we need to do about the structure of that? Who's going to win? Why don't you let me know? And if you've enjoyed today's with Antone MotoGP, then why not give it a thumbs up? Or if you know someone who loves MotoGP, why don't you share the video with them? And I would love to get a subscription as always. All right, well, I hope you enjoy the racing this weekend, and I'll see you again soon. Okay, bye for now.